Let me tell you something that I think is getting completely lost in the celebration this morning. And before I get into the analysis, there is one specific detail from last night that I want you to keep in mind as we go through this. It changes how you read everything else. We will get to it. But hold on to that thought. I was watching this match last night, and genuinely by the second goal, I had to stop and just take a moment, because what I was seeing was not what I expected. Not in that context, not under those conditions. And I say this as someone who has been watching this story develop across the entire season. Victor Gyökeres didn't just score a hat-trick last night, he scored a hat-trick completely alone. No Alexander Isak, no Dejan Kulusevski, no Lucas Bergvall. Sweden walked out against Ukraine in a World Cup elimination playoff with their first-choice striker injured, their most creative wide player unavailable, and their most exciting young talent sitting in a treatment room somewhere. And they asked one man to carry their entire attacking threat in a match they simply could not afford to lose. And he delivered. 3 goals, a must-win result, Sweden through to the playoff final. Now look, I understand completely why Arsenal fans are celebrating this morning. Of course they are. And honestly, so am I, because this is our striker, the player we watched arrive in the summer with enormous expectation and enormous pressure. And the player who is now standing on an international stage and delivering in moments that genuinely matter. That feeling this morning is completely valid. Enjoy it. But I want to take you somewhere slightly different today, because when I actually sit down and analyse what happened last night, not just the headline, not just the 3 goals, I think there are 2 very different stories running simultaneously. One that should genuinely excite every Arsenal supporter watching this, and one that honestly nobody seems willing to talk about openly right now. Stay with me, because the second story is the one that actually matters most for this season. So let's get into it properly. First, what actually happened and why the context matters so much more than the scoreline suggests. Sweden's situation going into this playoff was not comfortable by any measure. They finished bottom of their qualifying group. They reached this playoff stage exclusively because of their Nations League performance, not because of anything they achieved in qualification. And when you strip away the names who are unavailable, you realise that the squad Graham Potter had to work with was missing significant quality right across the attacking line. This was not a comfortable setup for a striker, not even close. This was a pressure environment, an elimination match at home against a Ukraine side that is well organised defensively and physically very competitive. These are not the conditions under which form strikers typically produce hat-tricks. These are the conditions that expose players who are carrying any kind of psychological fragility or physical limitation. Gyökeres produced his best international performance in years, and that specific detail, that one is where the real analysis begins. This is where things change, not just for Sweden, and for how we should be reading this player's trajectory altogether. And later, I want to show you exactly why that trajectory has a very direct connection to what Arsenal do in the transfer market this summer. Because the hat-trick actually revealed something about the squad that most people are not discussing today. Here is what I think a lot of people are glossing over this morning. He has been through a dry spell internationally, that is confirmed, while his club form was building at Arsenal, while he was scoring goals, leading the press, establishing himself week after week in the Premier League. His international record was simply not matching that trajectory. There was a disconnect between the player Arsenal were seeing regularly and the player Sweden were getting at international level. And I want to be honest with you, that disconnect quietly concerned me. I was not sure, watching some of those earlier Sweden performances, whether the Premier League goals were coming partly because of the system around him rather than purely from him. That doubt was real. I think for a lot of Arsenal supporters watching those international windows, there was a version of that same uncertainty sitting in the back of your mind too. Last night answered it, but here is what I did not fully anticipate, and this is the part that genuinely shifted my view. It was not just that he scored, it was how he scored. And more importantly, the system he scored in, because when I looked at that more carefully, something became very clear that I think most of the coverage today is completely missing. We will get to that in a moment, but first, the foundation. When a striker breaks through a confidence barrier in a high-stakes environment, not a routine game, not a dead rubber, the psychological shift that follows is measurable. It shows up in performance data, it shows up in body language, and critically, it shows up in the weeks immediately after. Strikers who score meaningful goals in pressure matches carry that forward. It compounds, the dry spell breaking at this particular moment, 3 weeks before Arsenal's most critical run of fixtures, is not a small footnote. That timing is analytically significant, but here is the question I want you to sit with for a moment. Is this simply a confidence peak, or is this evidence of something deeper changing in his game? To answer that properly, I need to take you somewhere tactically, because this is where the real story lives. Graham Potter does not set Sweden up the way Mikel Arteta sets up Arsenal. That matters enormously. The pressing triggers are different. The block structure is different. The spacing between the lines, the verticality of the attack, the moments when the striker is asked to hold and when he is asked to run, all of it is different. Sweden under Potter are more direct, more vertical. Arsenal under Arteta are more patient, more positional, more deliberate in how they build and in how they press. Two completely different systems, two completely different sets of demands on a central striker. And Gyökeres operated effectively in both. Honestly, this surprised me. Not the quality, I expected that, but the ease of the transition between two very different tactical environments, that is not something you see often. And it is the specific detail I mentioned at the start of this video that changes how you read everything else. This detail matters more than people realise because most elite strikers at this level are system dependent to some degree. They are built into a specific tactical environment and they function because that system creates the conditions they need. That is not a criticism, that is simply the reality of modern football. Even some of the most celebrated strikers in the world are fundamentally reliant on the quality and structure around them to produce consistently. What Gyökeres demonstrated last night is what analysts describe as system-agnostic pressing intelligence. His movement, his timing, his understanding of when to press and when to hold his position, his ability to find space in central channels and arrive into the box at precisely the right moment, these qualities transferred from one tactical system to another without a meaningful drop in effectiveness. That is not common, and that is precisely the quality that separates a very good striker from a genuinely elite one. Think about what Arteta actually needs from a central striker in his specific system. He needs someone who can hold the ball under pressure with their back to goal, draw defenders and release runners in behind. He needs someone who can initiate the press from the front, closing down the goalkeeper and centre-backs to compress space for the midfield to engage. He needs someone who can arrive late into the box off the shoulder of defenders after the build-up has already dragged the defensive line out of its shape. And he needs someone who can carry the full weight of the attacking burden on nights when the creativity behind them is limited or disrupted by injuries or suspension. Gyökeres did every single one of those things last night without the supporting cast. So yes, the confidence argument stands, but the tactical argument is actually the stronger story. And in a moment, I'm going to show you why that tactical argument connects directly to the most important question about Arsenal's season right now. But first, this is where everything shifts. Now I want to introduce what I think is the critical turning point in how we should be reading all of this. Here is the part most viewers missed, because everything I have told you so far is positive, and it is all legitimate, but there is a match on Tuesday that changes the frame completely, and I think it is important that we talk about it honestly. Sweden face Poland in the playoff final on March 31st, 3 days from now, and Robert Lewandowski will be standing on the other side of that pitch. Let me be precise about what this means analytically. The Ukraine match was impressive, the context was meaningful, but Ukraine, with respect to them, are not the most demanding defensive test at this level. Poland are better organised. Poland carry more quality throughout their squad, and Poland have a striker who has spent his entire career performing in exactly this kind of pressure environment. If Gyökeres can reproduce his level against Poland in 3 days on significantly shorter recovery against a more disciplined and experienced defensive structure, then we are not talking about a peak moment in isolation. We are talking about a confirmed new standard of performance. And there is a very significant analytical difference between those two conclusions. Something important happens depending on how Tuesday goes, and we will come back to exactly what that means for Arsenal's run-in shortly. But here is the part that needs to be said directly, even if it is not the easiest conversation for Arsenal supporters right now. Sweden reaching the World Cup matters to Gyökeres personally. It clearly means everything to him. His words after the game confirmed that without any ambiguity, and I respect that completely. International football matters, national pride matters, and every one of us watching wants him to get there. But if we are being honest, analytically honest, The Poland game on Tuesday represents the single greatest uncontrollable risk to Arsenal's title challenge that currently exists. Not a squad decision, not a tactical problem, an external event that Arsenal simply cannot influence. And that is a strange and uncomfortable position for a title-challenging club to find itself in. Let me show you why I say that. And this is where the picture becomes genuinely concerning if you care about what happens between now and May. Look at Arsenal's injury situation right now. Martin Odegaard is a doubt. William Saliba is a doubt. Jurrien Timber is a doubt. Mikel Merino is out. Eberechi Eze is out until at least April. Leandro Trossard is carrying a hip concern. Gabriel withdrew from the Brazil squad. This is not a fully fit squad heading into the final stretch of a title race. These are real confirmed absences, not speculation. In that specific context, Gyökeres is not simply one attacker among several options. He is the central figure around whom Arsenal's entire offensive structure is currently organised. Kai Havertz contributes enormously to this system that is not in question, but he does not replicate the same profile. The combination of physicality, pressing intelligence, aerial presence, and penalty box movement that Gyökeres brings to that central role is not something Arsenal can fully replace from within the current squad in the short term. So the Poland game is not just about Sweden's World Cup qualification in a very real sense. It is also the 90 minutes that stands between Arsenal's title ambitions and a scenario that nobody at the club wants to contemplate publicly. I will be watching Tuesday's match with very different eyes than I watched last night, and I suspect a lot of you will be too. Now, I promised earlier that the hat-trick reveals something about Arsenal's summer that most people are not discussing. Keep that in mind. We are almost there. Let me give you my professional assessment of all of this, because I have been around this long enough to recognise when genuine analytical concern becomes unnecessary panic. And I am not panicking here. I am just being precise. The hat-trick against Ukraine is significant for exactly the reason Arteta identified when Arsenal committed to signing this player. The profile was always the argument: physical striker, intelligent presser, psychologically competitive, capable of leading a line in isolation, capable of performing when the pressure is highest and when there is nobody else to share the load. Arteta spent £55 million, rising to £63.5 million on a player who had scored 63 goals in a single season and had demonstrated consistently that he could carry a team's attacking burden alone. The signing was not a gamble on potential. It was an investment in a verified, established profile. What happened last night on an international stage was not a surprise to Arteta. Not internally, anyway. It was confirmation that what he already knew about this player holds up at the highest level, not just in a Portuguese league context or in domestic cup football. And that confirmation now being public validated in front of the entire football world matters in ways that go beyond last night's result. 15 goals in 36 appearances in his debut Premier League season, already more than any Arsenal player managed throughout the entire previous campaign, leading all Premier League scorers in the 2026 calendar year. These numbers are not decoration. They tell a specific story about a player who arrived in a new country, in a new league, in a new tactical system, and accelerated rather than adjusted. That is genuinely rare, and if you have been watching every week the way I know a lot of you have, you already feel that in how he plays, there is a certainty to him now that was not quite there in September. But here is where the bigger picture comes in, and this is the part I want you to remember when the summer window opens. So what does all of this actually mean for the rest of the season? 3 things, and the third one is the one nobody is talking about today. The first is the Champions League quarter-final against Sporting CP. This is where things get genuinely fascinating. Gyökeres going back to the club that built him, the club that developed his final form before Arsenal came calling, in the middle of his most productive and confident run as a professional footballer. That is not simply a media narrative, that is a psychological and tactical event with real substance. His motivation for those 2 legs will not need any external stimulus. And a motivated, confident Gyökeres, as we are now clearly seeing, is one of the most dangerous attacking propositions in European football at this moment. The second thing to watch is the title run-in. If he comes back from the international break fit and carrying this form, Arsenal's goal threat across the final weeks of the season reaches a level that very few Premier League defences will be able to handle consistently. Southampton, Bournemouth, Crystal Palace, these are fixtures where a striker in this kind of form can be genuinely decisive without needing perfect performances from the team around him. And the third, this is the one I promised you, the one most people are missing today. Here is my honest analytical position on that. The hat-trick last night actually confirms a structural gap that Arsenal's recruitment department needs to address seriously in the off-season. Not because Gyökeres is going anywhere, not because his form is in any doubt, but because when one player's availability in late March becomes a genuine source of anxiety for an English title contender, when an international playoff match triggers real concern about whether a Premier League title challenge can survive it, the answer cannot simply be to trust that things will go well. The answer has to be to build depth and balance that removes that anxiety in future seasons. Something important is sitting inside that observation, and Arsenal's board will know exactly what it means when they review this window in the summer. That is the honest picture, and I think it is important to say it clearly without dressing it up. Arsenal are a club that has done exceptional work building this squad. Arteta has created something with genuine quality and identity, but there is one tactical evolution still required, one piece of structural reinforcement before this becomes a truly self-sustaining elite force in English and European football. Gyökeres' performances, both last night and across this entire season, make the case for that evolution more urgent than anything else currently on the table. He has proven beyond reasonable doubt that he belongs at the very top level of the game. The profile was always real, the numbers back it up, and the hat-trick in a pressure international has removed any lingering narrative that his output was purely system-dependent or opposition-dependent. The question was never whether Gyökeres is good enough. That question is now firmly and definitively answered. The question Arsenal need to spend the summer answering is whether the structure around him is built to protect what they have found, sustain it at the highest level, and compete over time in a way that a striker of this quality genuinely deserves. For me, that is the real story behind last night's hat-trick. Not just a celebration, a reminder of what Arsenal have and a challenge to make sure they build accordingly. I am Amelia. This has been Amelia Arsenal Update, and I want to know what you think because genuinely I am curious. Do you believe Tuesday against Poland is where we find out if this is a new standard or a peak moment? And how confident are you that he comes back from this international window fully fit and firing? Drop it in the comments. I read them all, and this is exactly the kind of conversation worth having properly. See you for the next one.